Today is the 5th day of the June 85 7-day retreat. Yesterday we talked at length and in depth about fear. But we didn't talk about what may be the greatest and deepest fear of human beings, namely the fear of dying, fear of death. So right now, during this talk, can we look at the fear of dying, fear of death? One may have heard these words before and has to be so careful and attentive that the words don't just fall into the memory groove where one can repeat them. The repetition of the words or the going along with the words preventing a looking and attending and listening which is not ruled by the memory of what is being said. That requires the energy of attention. Maybe underlying a lot of our fears, or most of our fears, is this fear of coming to an end, of not being, not existing any longer. And implied in this fear, or else it may not at all be there, is that there is someone, an entity, which we call me, the I, or the self, which will come to an end, which will at one point no longer continue. So in looking at the fear of dying, one also has to look at this attachment to the feeling or conviction, to the idea of the me. One may say this is not a conviction or an idea for me, it is a reality. That there is me sitting here. I am sitting here, not you. So maybe we start by looking at that. When one says, I am sitting here, what is one referring to? It's a fact that there's a body here, legs, the bottom, the back, arms, the head, the chest, and all that goes on within this body. The heart beating, the breathing, the eyes are open, one sees people or trees or the rug, the hearing. Maybe there's pain in the knees. All of this, maybe one can agree to that, does not require to say, I am sitting here, except for distinguishing that this is sitting here and not that body over there. We have names to make sure that when one wants to call a person, that person will hear and respond. But in sitting here, is it necessary to say, I'm sitting here, if it's not a question of whose seat this is? There we get into complications already. That there is sitting here. And what is going on within the body can be discerned, felt, listened to, seen, at least on the surface, unless one looks at an X-ray, without the need of saying, this is me. What is then this feeling of me here? This is me sitting here. When one says that, what goes on in the mind? There may be what I just touched upon, the feeling that for at least this retreat, this is my seat. Or is it just a seat on which one sits? If one says it's my seat, there's the feeling of this belonging to me, having a right to it. Maybe one would get angry if one came, maybe one had a nice window seat, and somebody else was sitting on that nice window seat, all established with cushions all around, benches. What would the feeling be then? It's my seat, and the ownership of it, and with that also the anger or irritation at somebody not respecting this ownership, the insensitivity of that person or the greediness of that person versus my rights to it. I was there first. All of these thoughts would go on in the mind, wouldn't they? Emanating from this feeling of me and mine, and having their effect on the body. Anger, irritation, a movement, a momentum to set things right. Energy. The me can generate energies. The feeling of me, the energy to fight for one's rights or to be angry over being heard. Greed for more, for pleasure. All these energies can be generated from the feeling of me, which in itself is thought. To know that this is one's place requires thought. When one was living in a state of amnesia, one would not remember what one's seat was, what the seat was that one chose the first day. But also this feeling of I, here, isn't there an image connected with it? At least one. As the situation changes, hosts of images come up. Age-old images and always new ones added to it, to this rucksack full of images that we're carrying. I as a sitter here, as a member or as a non-member, a man or a woman. Can one look at a moment at the host of images one has of oneself as being a man or a woman? Trained into one from early childhood. and then maybe the reaction to the image that has been trained into one, and therefore the adoption of new images in reaction to the old images. All of it memory. Don't just listen to the word, but can you see that as you sit here and think of yourself, you have to invoke memory to see yourself as somebody. If someone has taken the seat one took the first day, there are ideas which spring from memory of what the rules are here, what one's rights are, and so forth. It's the operation of memory and thought that connected with all the physical accompaniments that a thought evokes throughout the organism, which makes up this feeling of me. All the memories I have of my earlier days, past years, maybe early years, some of them aided by photo albums, were collected by the family, and later one may not have been as orderly as the family and keep albums. One just has stashes of photographs. If one looks through them, yeah, this is me. A continuity of memory is me, with all my aspirations, hopes, fears, ideas, the knowledge one has gotten in school, maybe one has gone to university. There's more image of oneself as being an educated person, whatever that means. Usually means having accumulated knowledge in certain fields, and that becomes part of the self-image. Maybe one has a degree or many degrees, that becomes part of the image of myself. And with this image go expectations of how one is treated by other people. In Germany, where I come from, if a person who was a doctor or professor wasn't called by their title, they would have been insulted. A feeling of being insulted or slighted. Even the wife of the professor was called Frau Professor, which is very important to Frau Professor. I always wished it would have even been applied to the children. And seeing the respect, in quotation marks, which was given people with title, there emerges in the child or the young person the desire to also have that respect. I'm not saying that all degrees are gotten for that motive, but that's in there too. At least in a country where a title is so highly respected. I don't know how it is there now. It may have changed, may not have. Does one begin to realize, or does one realize, that the feeling of me, as solid as it seems, because it is so physical, good feelings, bad feelings, hurt feelings, flattered feelings are all physical, not just thought. Thought, as we have explained before, connects the brain connections of the neurons and synapses and nerves connect to all the organs and muscles and glands, which do their programmed thing when triggered, resulting in feelings, palpable, real feelings of pain or joy, pleasure, anxiety. And And one identifies with that. This is me, my fears. That's why one may be surprised to hear that other people have also fears or anger, thoughts in the mind. One is so personally identified with all this, and often there's no space or sensitivity to realize others are the same boat, are the same way. They seem different superficially, but the feeling of me and mine, I think, exists in every human being. Unless there is a seeing of it and a freeing of it. Maybe the cultural tradition, it is so in here. I have studied some of about American Indian tribes. There to stick out as an individual is not at all fostered or existing as a cultural pattern. Then the whole tribe is the me or the I. The whole tribe is the thing that one is identified with, not with the individual self. But it is the same process, whether it holds for an individual or a smaller group or a larger group. Here we come to another ingredient of the me, which is all the groups, organizations, nation that one identifies with is part of me. The feeling I'm an American, or I'm a German, I'm a South American, I'm a Russian. Unless one has seen through this and dropped this kind of identification, there is something vibrates in one at this thought. Feeling of pride, belonging, attachment to the cultural tradition of one's country, the cultural accomplishments. I remember a little verse we had to learn, or maybe it was also on the school wall in Germany, maybe embroidered or something. I can't quite visualize it anymore, and if I can translate it out of hand, it was something like this: I was born to feel German. I am all set to feel German. First comes my country, then all the others. First my home, then the world. And in one way or another, this kind of indoctrination goes on in every country, every tribe. And it is cutting up humankind into many, many, many different fragments. And with this cut-upness comes either the desire to maintain it and defend it, or the fear of losing it, which go hand in hand. Defense and aggression go together, individually and nationally. So coming back to the self, the me that is sitting here, we've listed a lot that makes up this feeling of me. Not only my own aspirations or maybe accomplishments, if I have any, but also that of the groups that I identify with, their history, accomplishments, traditions make up a feeling of me adding pride, feeling of well-being, if things go well, and a feeling of anxiety if what I identify with is endangered or is breaking up. It is as though it was a part of me breaking up. Does one see that? Not just think, here she goes again. She says it every time. Couldn't she say something different? I've heard it over and over. One must see it, and really also drop this stuff. If it isn't dropped, it continues, here and throughout the world. And fear of this that one is attached to, identified with, fear of that coming to an end also continues to undermine the quality of one's living. Because as long as there's fear, how can one live wholly and fully? There's always the fear this may come to an end if one is attached to this feeling of me and what is mine, my family. I was interested when there was some kind of a campaign for nuclear disarmament or freeze, or whatever. At the time, the campaign was the movement. The way it was presented was in terms of me and my family being destroyed. And that's one's first thought, isn't it? Like on this little poem, first comes my country and then the others. First my home. Home in German, not meaning my individual home. Heimat is the word, meaning my fatherland. Others call it motherland. What is my identification? And then the others. So the fear of war, of nuclear destruction, or whatever destruction. The first thought, and maybe the last thought, is me and my family, those who are dear to me. One is so encapsulated in this identification of the small circle, or the large small circle that one is attached to and identified with, which prevents a global feeling for all human beings alike. Not the fixation on my family, which doesn't mean one doesn't take responsibility for one's family, one's children, if one has them. But to notice, to let come into awareness how the mind works in parts and parcels. And with this one part which is so predominant in the brain, the part that says me, mine, I, what I have coming to me, how people should treat me. What I want to make of myself, what I want to become. The attachment to this predominant part in the brain automatically includes the fear of this not being or coming to an end. Does one see that? what one is attached to and identified with, one needs for what one calls one's life. It temporarily may bind some anxiety. The anxiety of standing alone, being lonely. Standing alone is a different thing. There's no anxiety in standing alone, or the anxiety is met immediately as it arises, without looking for things to comfort one or to support one. One realizes this is just makeshift and doesn't resolve anxiety as it arises. But if there is, for fear and pain of loneliness, feeling of abandonment or separation, isolation, if out of that fear one attaches, we went into that very thoroughly yesterday, one clings to something. Yesterday we talked about people and ideas, today we're talking more about the sense of me, which has a name, and so many memories about how it looks, how it used to look, and how it will look. What it was, what it will become. When there's this attachment to this me with all its images and memories and hopes, ambitions and fears, then there's automatically the fear of this not being, losing its life, dying. The two go together, this way of living, with attachment to the me and the fear of losing that me, of dying, of the me not being anymore. Then one wants to know how is it when one is dying, when one is dying, what is death? And very often if one looks at this question, at this wondering and doubting what is death, wanting to know it, isn't it that one wants to make it known, wants to have an idea about it, so that maybe if one has an idea, a clear idea of what death is, then one may not have to be afraid of it. It's again the me wanting to be in the know, so that it doesn't have to be afraid. Some people say that if I only knew what death is, then maybe I would lose my fear of death. This tremendous trust and dependence on knowledge, on knowing something, and this faith that knowledge is maybe the real thing. The mind works this way. If we're in a problem situation, we try to think our way out of it. The thinking starts immediately. There's some security in it. At least I'm thinking about it. Rather than being in touch with a problem, with a raw problem as it exists in oneself. The security in thinking what could be done or what could be a solution, and that there is some temporary, sometimes very flimsy security. And so it is with wanting to know what death and dying is. Because for a while here, in this country particularly, that whole death and dying thing was very taboo. One wasn't thinking about it. It was repressed, and a funeral was sort of as an amazing thing in this country. Maybe not just in this country, but I encountered it for the first time here, how people are made to look better than they ever looked when they were alive. It's an art that one studies at a university, to make a dead person look alive, and the reason given is so that the people can remember that person in this rosy kind of a way. But something has changed with the interest in Eastern religion and the coming to this country of Eastern spiritual teachers. Has been an awakening of interest in death and in rebirth or reincarnation. In death, we'll talk about reincarnation, rebirth later, but there is a new kind of approach to this whole problem of dying. I'm not at all familiar with details. I've never been to a workshop. There are many workshops now about death and dying. I did read years ago the Tibetan Book of the Dead, in which, as I remember, if I remember correctly, the priest sits at the bedside of the deceased or dying and whispers into his ears mantram or sacred chants, and also telling him or her what is going to happen on the in-between, intermediate state between death and rebirth, what all apparitions will be there, and encouraging the dying not to be afraid, and that ultimately all these apparitions, whether scary or benign, are the productions of the dying person's own mind. But yet being there and this whispering into the ear of what is happening and how to behave, how to conduct oneself, the mind. Personally, and I've heard that in workshops that are conducted now in this country, maybe in other countries as well, something similar is being presented, and people can train themselves in this on how to be with dying people. One person who was to such a workshop told me that when she was with a dying close relative, she did this, and she said she felt very good about this, being able to do something for this dying person, whispering some instructions on how to breathe or how to think or what to think. She didn't say, and probably didn't know how the person felt who was dying. She only said that she herself felt good. There was something that she could do. There was a good feeling about this, being with this person and doing something for him. In listening and reflecting upon this, I thought that when I was dying, I would not want anybody to whisper anything into my ear. What to do, what to see, what is coming. Because all of that is thought, suggestion, and may not be so, and would divide up or cloud the at least potential clarity of perception, of pure perception of what is happening. See, thought, thinking wanting to make death its own, knowing about it, is what thought, what thinking cannot do. It's impossible. That's asking for the impossible. Because thinking already comes from memory. It can only imagine things based on what it knows, which is the past. And dying is precisely the ending, the absence, the non-functioning of thinking. The quietness of thinking. The abeyance of it. The silence of it. And if this is not understood by thinking, there will be anxiety. I can't do this. I must do this. I have to do this. Because we said earlier there is a pseudo-security in thinking things out. Because the confusion that exists that what is thought is real, but it's only thinking. Do you see that? So dying, whether at the end of one's life, whenever it comes, or dying this instant to all the ideas one has about oneself, the pseudo-securities of one's attachments, what one calls one's own. That's not a matter of thought, it's a matter of happening. Without the aid of thought, it is the quietness of thought and there being nothing to hold on to and no one to do the holding. Because this me also is a thought. Do you see that? Thought and memory, and all that comes of it, is this me. The body is what it is. Birds have bodies, they fly around, they do all kinds of things, build nests, hatch eggs, feed the young, pick for seeds, worms, dig for worms. But there's no feeling of I there. And that why is there a lightness to their life if one watches it? It's unproblematic. If another bird comes into the territory, it's amazing. The smallest bird will chase the largest bird, and sometimes the large bird gets the message and leaves. Rarely is there a fight except for food. Animals eat each other. But when a bird chases another bird out of its area, eventually the intruder gets the message, or else the other one leaves. And then it seems to be completely over. We carry that thought with us of our divisions. If we've been hurt, in the brain accumulates residues of memory about the hurt, the happening, and there is this deeply seated habit of needing revenge in a subtle form, even in a polite form or in a gross form, to avenge a hurt or something that was done to one, to pay it back. Maybe not to the person who did it, but to someone. This is not all deliberate. A lot of this happens automatically and unawares. All stemming from the sense of me. I was hurt. I deserve better. I don't deserve that. I'm going to show him or her how it feels. Can one watch this particular thing in one's daily life? This subtle or gross program to avenge something. Maybe the words are too gross, and then one doesn't see it. It starts with that residue, making a memory of what happened and carrying it around with one. When one sees that person again, one sees the person in terms of what he or she did to one, which means there's no possibility for free and light and fresh new relationship in which the past is literally buried, forgotten, dropped. Not that one can't discuss something with another person, but that's a different thing. That's not an automatic revenge or I don't know another word for it. Paying back. It's to open it up together. What happened? And if one is open, both sides are open, then the thing can really be dropped. It need not be carried around and do its unconscious, programmed, conditioned thing without awareness, which only heaps memory upon memory and until there is no relationship at all, just human beings in isolation with their memories. We were talking about the fear of dying. The thought of me not being anymore, losing my family, maybe not being able to finish what I set out in my life to accomplish, the fear of that. It's not such a rational, thought-out thing. It's a deep feeling. Not being one. And because one can't imagine it, because one can't think it out, it is that much more anxiety-arousing. Because one is not at all used to or willing to live with insecurity, with not knowing. Actually, not knowing need not be insecure at all. But because one hasn't tried it out, one thinks that's going to be totally unsafe. One will feel unprotected. The fear of not continuing as I know myself. The story of my life coming to an end. It's like reading a fascinating novel in which eventually the hero or heroine dies and the sorrow one feels for that. But then one can pick up a new novel and go through this drama again. But with oneself, will there be another novel? One doesn't know, and that's why there was such open reception of theories of reincarnation and rebirth. One really had a new thing to cling to, or has, if one begins to believe in that, because this sort of assuages the fear of this me not continuing, meaning the thought of me not continuing. because no theory of rebirth or reincarnation promises that this body will continue, and if one is old and beginning to get arthritic or sick, that has disease, then one doesn't want this body to go along. One wants a new one. A new one, but with the old me, except not its problems. You see how if one looks at it, how selective one's desires are. One does want to be new, free from problems, and yet still have this identity of me. It was so well expressed by a young woman who came to visit her. She was a daughter of old friends. She saw a book lying around on, I don't know what it was, something on rebirth, and she was very fascinated to read it. At that time I was a believer in that. And she said, all I want to know is this: can you tell me, when I'm reborn, will I still remember that I am me? And when I said, I didn't know about that, it may not be so, that she said, well, what then be reborn for? She was thinking. She was thinking very, very clearly about how she was feeling. Because births are taking place all the time. There is no dearth of birth. I remember when I was little, once walking through the streets, my brother was ill. He was in a pushed cart. Maybe the memory is not correct, but there was another buggy being pushed with a little baby. You could see the two eyes peeking out of that buggy. And I wondered whether this could be me. And somehow or other, that it could be me. It could just as well be me as who was walking along here. It was a very vague thing. But this is what I was trying to say here. There are babies born, I don't know how many, a minute or a second, all over the world. But if one is reborn, one wants to be me. One wants the thought of me to continue. It is so absurd in a way. Because connected with the thought of me are all the memories, all the pains, the remembered pleasures which are not the real thing, all the wanting. Why does one want that to be reborn? Rather than find out if this tremendous attachment to all the memories and thoughts and fears and desires to be, to become, to have, to possess, whether there can be a dying to all of that now. Not I must die to that. That's a new thought, a new principle that one may get attached to and try to implement it with practices. But just wondering. Whether this has to dominate one's moment-to-moment living. Or whether there can be a totally different way of living, in which not the I with all its memories and desires and fears dominates every moment, but an awareness which is not focused on this little part, on this little fragment, which then, if it is in focus assumes the size of the universe. At least so it seems. I think if one sees image, thought, memory as being just that, it loses its grip and its overriding importance as it is seen. It cannot help. It can't do otherwise. Not that at the moment of seeing it and it's losing its importance or power, one doesn't know what will happen the next moment, and one doesn't know. There's no guarantee that this moment will last, and that is what immediately thought wants a guarantee that a moment of freedom will last forever. That's thought, creating this forever. It's a thought. When there's no thought of forever or yesterday or me and my continuity, fear for it, or none of that, just attending with an openness which is totally vulnerable to whatever may happen. Then is there fear of dying? Dying of an image? One sees that the image is the thing that makes us half dead now. Because when one lives in images, one is not alive, not fully alive. One is either spurred on to achieve and progress, and that's usually at the expense of others. Oh, one is scared for this image, or hurt over what somebody said or did or didn't do. Why would one want that to continue? You may say, yes, but I'm really afraid of a painful death, a slow dying of cancer, or something dragged out, painful. I don't want any part of it. Nobody does. But if there isn't this preoccupation with it now while one is young and healthy, and this preoccupation is a tremendous drain on the brain and the body. Anxiety is a drain. Not just a drain, it's wearing, grating on the whole system, wearing it out. If there is not this preoccupation with the fear of pain and dying now, who knows how one will meet it when it happens? If there's openness now to live without attachment to images, people and things, openness to be fully alive, be it painful or joyful, to feel it and to drop it when it's over, then one will meet death in one way or another. One doesn't know. It will take care of itself when there is the openness and the vulnerability. And seeing how attachment immediately divides what is whole, cuts up what is whole and indivisible. We will end here for today.